Welcome, everybody, to session 6, Modern Developments. Sam, you say at the end of this chapter that what you've been seeking to do in this book as a whole up to this point is to articulate a truly incarnational theology in a broadly Barthian shape. Can you explain why Barth is such an important figure for the book?
Yes, so two reasons. Number one, Barth causes a revolution in modern theology because Immanuel Kant made theology almost impossible at the end of the 18th century by saying that we could know nothing for certain that didn't come through our sense experience, touch, taste, etc. Schleiermacher rescued theology 20 years later, 30 years later, by saying we have a kind of sixth sense, a sense of absolute dependence. And that's almost like a sense, even though we don't have fingers and tongues to engage it. And therefore, in the 19th century, it's hardly an exaggeration to say that certainly continental theology, that's to say Germany basically, was based around that feeling of absolute dependence, that sense that religion was this kind of religion doesn't tell you how the heavens go, it tells you how to go to heaven kind of thing. And what that made it was a very anthropocentric faith. It's all about our sense, our experience, or experiential expressivism, as one modern theologian calls it. It's very much focused on us and our notion of God. And there's many aspects, not least of the charismatic movement today, that are still basically Schleiermacher in that way, even though they'd think of themselves and be horrified to be associated with the most famous liberal theologian. But liberal can mean 100 things. So along comes Barth, rejecting his teachers, his Schleiermacherian teachers, who backed the Kaiser in the First World War and was horrified by that. Tried to find a deeper source of theology, and they basically reversed it. Rather than saying we know what peace and love and justice are, we see them walking around in Jesus, and he's the best thing that's ever been, so we say he must be the Son of God. It's the other way around. We see Jesus, and we don't know what peace and love and justice are, but we see Jesus, and we learn from him what they are. So I basically 100% accept that move. And that's foundational to my theological position. And so, for example, I seek our human identity. This isn't in the book, but I've written about elsewhere, in notions of things like a transfiguration rather than our being black or our being a lesbian or something like that. I don't see that. I see the significance of those designations, but I don't see them as fundamentally foundational. And that's a Barthian move. So the second thing about Barth is that he has this extraordinary reconfiguration of the doctrine of election, which was usually conceived in Reformed circles about predestination and who goes upstairs and who goes downstairs. And it was decided from the very beginning, which is such a ghastly kind of doctrine in the way that's often formulated. And he says the real doctrine of election is God's original choice never to be except to be with us in Christ. So that basic move that I make, that the world was created for God to be with us in Christ, is a kind of paraphrase extension, but within the school of Barth, basically. He tends to use the word be for us in Christ more than he used the word with. So that's a little tweak that I've made. But I would never have had any of these ideas if I hadn't read Barth and people influenced by him.
Yeah.
So that's why it's so foundational. Obviously, as the book, as the chapter goes on, I express those reservations and those tweaks more explicitly.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. I mean, you kind of say Barth trips right at the finish line a little bit. That in some ways
that's a very good description.
I think that's a great description. Yeah. Is it? I mean, it's his doctrine of creation kind of writes a check that his doctrine of reconciliation can't quite cash.
No, I wouldn't put it quite like that. I mean, I would say that his well, his doctrine of election, as I've just articulated it, in other words, God's original decision never to be except to be with us in Christ, he is wonderfully articulate about that. He doesn't always use the vocabulary that I would use from my own particular theological standpoint, but I'm basically thrilled by and inspired by the way he outlines all of that until he gets basically to what you call reconciliation, the big sort of book four. All of his books have several volumes, but and he didn't finish book four. But the doctrine of reconciliation was what happens on the cross, and there he moves into sacrificial and satisfaction and even substitutionary language far more than I'm comfortable with. And I, one of the bits I was most sort of pleased with in terms of the research for the book was these 2 or 3 passages I highlight in chapter 6, where he sort of starts the paragraph with a God of with, and he ends it with a God of for. And I sort of show the sleight of hand and where I feel he lets himself down from my point of view.
Yeah.
And I think that's that's why you do research. That's why you sit in the library and read a lot of Barth, is that you find these passages and you think,
Hmm.
he was great at the beginning of the paragraph. Why didn't they just stick to that?
Yeah. I found it. Yeah. That's great. Thank you.